Tall, Caucasian. He speaks Vietnamese. Sounds suspicious to me. Up next on the Crossing Ideas podcast. Welcome to the Crossing Ideas podcast. I'm Mark Sasse, where I'll attempt to balance the issues of today through a lens of a lifetime of international living. Episode 4, My Life as a Spy, even though I wasn't one. In the summer of 1999, I moved from Hanoi, Vietnam, to the city of Thanh Nguyen, just 60 miles north of Hanoi. I had just finished 15 months of intensive full-time language study in Hanoi, and with my newfound fluency was ready to take on the next challenge, wanting to submerge myself into a regular Vietnamese neighborhood. Thanh Nguyen quickly became a home to me. Our kids made friends. The teaching situation at the Thanh Nguyen Teachers Training University was great. And I really enjoyed getting to know the beautiful, serene-like country surroundings of Thanh Nguyen. After a while, a few things started happening that made me suspect that the government was watching me, and perhaps was even a little suspicious of me. This is where I'll introduce Chi Lien. Now, Chi is you add to the beginning of a name. When you think of someone like an older sister, it's a familiar pronoun, literally means big sister. And when you use it, it means that the two people are close. They are friends. And she was definitely a friend to all of the foreign teachers at our school. She was our foreign affairs liaison in Thanh Nguyen. The only person I ever knew that put ice in her beer, but hey, that's okay. I would go up to her office for various things, visas, travel documents, official documents, and whatnot. And in another episode, I'm going to be talking much more about her, related to learning patience in a foreign land. But for our purposes today, I want to talk about visiting her in her office. I went to see her one day, and she was particularly perturbed. She looked at me and said, there was a government official here asking about you. Asking about me? Why? He said, why does Mark go all over the province on his motorbike? Okay, I might have put a little bit of the attitude in that, but you get the idea. Then, in reply to him, she paused for a moment. To me, she gave this very perfectly toned, deadpanned response. She told him, because he lives here. I just about burst out laughing. And she goes, oh, I hate these people. They drive me crazy. She resented them, the local officials, the local communist political officials. She resented them for butting their noses into the school business. And I got the sense that she just didn't care for the tone of the conversation that she was having with this official. She, the school official, wanted me to know that someone from the government had been watching me. But she told me, don't worry about it. But I did start to wonder, why were they paying attention to me? After a moment of reflection, I guess it became quite obvious. I stood out in a big way. Let's go through the list. An American in a place where there were very few Americans, especially in 1999, Thanh Nguyen. There were just a small group of us. I am 6'3". I stand out literally in a Vietnamese crowd. And I weighed 100 kg. Okay, we're just going to ballpark that, okay? I'm not going to get into specifics, but let's just say I weighed 100 kg. And when I told someone that I would weigh, 100 or a little bit more than 100 kg, they couldn't believe that somebody could actually weigh that much. And I can't tell you how many times that I was told how strong I was, which, by the way, that's the code for fat, approximately. Okay, let's just get it all out there. One time I was in Hanoi in a small mini mart. There were two girls in the aisle, and they were talking about me. Now, they didn't know that I could understand them. So let's just play along a little bit. And they looked at each other and they looked at me like towering over them. And they used the phrase "cao kwa," which literally means so tall, like super tall. I can't believe how tall he is. I paused and I looked at them for a moment and I shook my head and I'm like, "Kom cao do," and I said, "I'm not that tall." They had these they had these horrified eyes, like, what? This big ogre understood what we were saying? He spoke our language? And they were very embarrassed. It was absolutely awesome. I doubt they ever spoke about a foreigner in front of a foreigner again. But that's just another way that I stood out. Here's another example: basketball. I had some friends in Taiwan, some of the college students there, especially at the other school as well, that was nearby. They loved playing basketball, and so I would go up to their court sometime at the other school, and I would play. And I I must admit, I felt like an NBA star. I was blocking shots and I was muscling my way under the hoop. I totally dominated. I totally stood out. They always wanted me on their team. And then related to basketball, but this also shows how I was just different from other people. I would do things like this. I saw this little patch of ground near our house that was just vacant, and I'm like, "Hey, that would be a nice little place to put up a basketball uh, rim." And so I searched out, hey, where can I find a big pole? And then I got somebody to bring a pole over, and I got somebody to put the pole in the ground for me. And then I'm like, hey, I need a backboard. And I figured out how to make a backboard, have somebody make me a backboard. And I created my own little basketball court right next to my house. People don't do that. Just weird Americans. Okay. But on top of being physically big, I stood out in very other tangible ways as well. I spoke the language fluently. I rode on a little dream motorcycle, one of those, small clutchless 100cc motorbikes. Actually, truth be told, mine was 110cc. So, yeah, I was zipping down those roads. It was small for me, but I didn't care. I loved that little bike, and I would go all over with it. And I would just spend a lot of time, riding around the province, experiencing my surroundings. And come to think of it, that government official was absolutely correct. I was all over the place and I loved it. There was a little swimming hole that I would take the kids to sometimes. Beautiful little place. Then there was this little hill that overlooked gorgeous rice paddies. We would just go up there, take pictures, just sit there, eat a snack, and just look off into the horizon. Beautiful. Tea fields. Taiwan is famous for its tea, its green tea, and it's called chia boop, and it's the most bitter, strong tea you would ever taste in your life. The first time I tasted it, I'm like, man, that's just brutally strong. And you get used to it after a while, and then after, even now, I kind of crave it a little bit because I haven't had it in so many years. It's so unique. But anyways, the tea fields are just absolutely gorgeous. So I found where some of those were, and I would take my bike and just go off and ride down through the tea plantations there. And then I would, randomly I would see these sometimes kids or sometimes someone who might be doing some work in the tea field. They just have this shock on their face, like, what is this guy doing riding around? And I would just pull up to them, turn the motorbike off, and we would just start chatting. It was really, really fun. Um, so I loved my outings. One more. There was there's a cave north of Taiwan. It's called the Phoenix Cave, Hang Fung Huang, and I'm not really sure why it's called the Phoenix Cave, but hey, anyways, it would take about an hour hike up to this massive cave, and it's really beautiful place. It was actually a related to during World War II era against the French. They would hide some things up there as well. And actually, when I was up there, I was like, it actually helped inspire one of the stories that I wrote, and I referenced this in another podcast as well. But the reach of the banyan tree. I'll leave a link down below. There's a cool little scene that happens right in that cave in my book, which is kind of fun. And so I would go up there. We would climb and hike and everything, and I would be riding around town, and I would stop and I would sit at the roadside stalls, and I would drink the bitter tea, and I would eat the fried potato cakes, and it was great. I would go to the market and I would scrounge around for every ingredient known to man. And I would go on these other trips as well into the provinces. I went to Hazang and Tuyen Quang and Kaobang. I have a whole episode on Kaobang about the waterfall that we drove up to one time. Just wonderful. And then even beyond that, I would sometimes just go scouting other schools for our organization, see if anybody else wanted English teachers. And so I would go up to these little provincial colleges that are very isolated. And I would walk up, and they're always a little bit afraid when they see this big white foreigner. But then I start talking to them, and it's very friendly. We would go in. I would see if I would say, "Hey, is any of the officials around, or anybody free to talk?" And I would usually meet up with someone, and we would chat about our organization, and I'd be speaking in their language, and I'd ask them if they want English teachers, and they were just always friendly and accommodating and interested in what we had to offer. And it's just what I was doing was not normal. And so I can see why someone watching me might ask, why is this American riding around everywhere, speaking to everyone? Why? And this comes me to one of the more frightening nights of our life, the explosion. We were sitting in the living room one night, and suddenly just this massive, massive explosion just shook the whole house. And we had this big wooden door, and they had these metal flanges on it or something that were screwed into the wood. And the screws popped out of the wood from the explosion. We were just like, what in the world is going on? And so we there's just this flurry of activity outside, and so we go up to the roof of our house, and we look off, and there's lots of people gathering, and they start moving in one certain direction, and then a second explosion, just massive boom in the distance, probably about a kilometer away. And then we waited for it, and then suddenly the force of the explosion hit us, and the wind just kind of blew us back. It's something I've never experienced before, and it was really frightening. We had no idea what we were doing. All these people that were heading towards that first explosion suddenly were in panic, started retreating the other way, because I guess if you're being smart, you don't go towards a place of danger. You go away from it. But curiosity, you know how it is. And so we were there on the roof. We didn't know what to do. We didn't know what was going on. We started contemplating, should we call a car? Should we try to get out of Tai Nguyen? Should we try to go to Hanoi? What is going on? And we decided to stay. There were no other explosions. We still didn't know what was going on. But then, I got curious too. It's like, what? It's not every day that you have this massive explosion in your backyard, and it was scary. So it was a couple of days after that, I get on my motorbike and I just decide to go investigate. And I go through the other university and into the back area that was very isolated, only a few houses, and well, not anymore. I came upon the place of the explosion, and there were houses just absolutely decimated, just completely down to their foundation, just completely blown apart. It was really sad to see. And there was nobody there at the time when I was riding my motorbike around. The houses were leveled. I really wanted to just start taking photos, but I felt really strange. Like, what if somebody saw me here? What would they think of an American, you know, investigating a massive explosion? If I ever felt like a spy, it was on that fact-finding journey. I was just being nosy. Did anyone see me? Did they take note of that? Now, if you're curious what the explosion actually was, the best information I could call from my spy network, I'm being facetious there, was that there was some sort of munitions storage area there that caught fire and then just absolutely obliterated any houses that were in the vicinity. And I never heard if anyone was hurt, if people were able to get out ahead of time. I have no idea. But I just want to set the record straight right here. I didn't do it. Okay. Anyways, there was one last incident that I want to bring up. This was a strange one that happened when I was living in Hanoi. No, sorry, when I was visiting Hanoi. I was asked to come down to do some translating at a meeting. Now, I had never been at this location before. I'd never met any of the people that were at this location. I had no idea what I was walking into. So I was there with a couple other Americans, and this Vietnamese man walks in, and the other Americans introduced me to him. And the man, he looks at me and he goes, I know who he is. And I was like, what does that mean? I don't know what that means. And he asked them not to have me in the meeting. So I'm like, okay. So I had to leave. I wasn't allowed to be there. Not sure why. Perhaps he and his other colleagues wanted to speak Vietnamese when they were discussing things, so they didn't want anybody else to understand what was happening. I don't know. But it convinced me at that point that yes, someone somewhere has been watching me. Who? Well, this was before cell phones. This is before I started willingly giving away my privacy. And as I look back upon that time, it made me think about, our current society where our privacy has been whittled away and we have more or less willingly embraced it. So my question kind of to myself was, do I really want to live in a society that tracks me, that tracks every little thing that I do? Now, there's a familiar response to a question like that, and it goes something like this. If you're not doing anything wrong, you have nothing to worry about. Really? So the innocent should just be inconvenienced and willingly give themselves over to be surveilled in the good name of catching the real bad guy? I'm not exactly buying that. America has the technology to track you well beyond the ability of the Vietnamese at the time that I lived in Vietnam. Remember, that Vietnam has a communist government, and they keep a tight rein on anything that might threaten their power. So the spying on me wasn't actually very shocking. But hey, we're in 2023. What about the privacy we have already ceded to our government? One of the reasons we left Vietnam is that I didn't want to become blacklisted and never be able to visit Vietnam again. I just felt like there were too many eyes upon me, and after 10 years, maybe it would be better to give it some time before they became too suspicious of me or before they started accusing me of something. Who knows? Perhaps I was being a little too paranoid. I'll admit, likely so. But we left in December 2003, and I've only visited 2 times since then. After having lived in a place like Vietnam, with prying eyes on every corner, I have become very suspicious myself of any government or commercial entity, for that matter, which continually roll out new ways to surveil the population. Let's just think about a few of these. Phones, obviously, that's the biggest one. The gimme. Our phones are constantly pinging off the towers. You don't think we can be tracked down if we want to be found? Oh yeah. How about online? The tracking that goes into every little keystroke that we do. Google, obviously, is the master at it. And the data that has been collected about all of us is just staggering. Little things like the running app on your phone. I've seen stories of hackers hacking into people's phones, and they're able to know where you're going to be running, the starting point, the ending point, exactly your route. That's pretty crazy. Obviously, our cars have GPS, can find us. They know where we're going to be. In New York and the northeastern states, and many other places have these as well. We up there we call it the Easy Pass. So when you're traveling on the thruway, or you're going through a toll booth, you just buzz right through. You don't have to slow down or anything because they know your car, they know your license, they know everything about you, and now they know you were just there at this time, and they know where you're going. I saw recently that as Ford is, developing these self-driving cars, it could be where you miss a payment and the car itself will just drive off on its own. Isn't that kind of mind-boggling? Then we talk about our purchasing power and everything that we purchase these days with the cashless society that we're moving towards. The credit cards, the Apple Pay, know where we've been, what we've spent it on. There's something that's really popped up in the news recently, and I encourage you to Google it a little bit yourself. It's quite fascinating, and I find it fascinating not in a great way. Is what's termed the 15-minute cities, where there are places in Canada, there's Paris, Australia, Singapore, certain U.S. cities that are exploring this idea of 15-minute cities, where everything that you need will be within 15 minutes of your home. And then you would then be limited to how much you could travel out of that zone, depending on how it's set up, so that you just have everything you want within a short distance, walking or biking or public transportation. Tom Logan of the University of Canterbury says that the 15-minute city is about flexibility, not restriction. Yeah, right. Who's going to take that at face value? You know, speaking of faces, facial recognition. They have the technology to just pick you out of a crowd walking down the street if they so choose. During the heart of the pandemic, I'm living in Saudi Arabia, and we had an app that we had to use to go anywhere. We wanted to go into a supermarket. We had to show them that our app was green. We were able to go into the supermarket. We went to the mall. We had to scan a code in order to check in before we would be let into the mall. So now that has gone away as the pandemic has also gone away, but the technology is there, and it's overwhelming. The vaccine passports, the passports that they've talked about, having to show technology in order to get through a gate, whether that be a airport or somewhere else. All of that is available now. You hear about the social credit systems that have been set up in China where they track your behavior in society. And we've seen that in Canada as well, where you don't like what we do or don't like what we say. Maybe we might freeze your bank account. Who knows? You know, it makes me want to have a log cabin in the woods by a stream, no cell phone, no internet, just nature and peace. Doesn't that sound lovely? And yet I know that it wouldn't be enough for me. Not anymore. I'm too connected to it all. But I can't help to lament that perhaps we've lost something. In 30 years, is the next generation going to look back and say, the good old days of the 2020s when we were only under surveillance in 10 different ways? What freedom we had then. Can't we just go where we want and do what we want? You know, that little thing called the pursuit of happiness. Instead of, if you aren't doing anything wrong, you shouldn't worry about being spied on. And, instead of that, how about this? If you aren't doing anything wrong, then leave me alone until I do something wrong. I like that a little better. No, I'm not a spy. I've never been a spy. I was just a Vietnamese speaking American white boy who loved to explore my surroundings. And 20 years later, after leaving Vietnam, I realized that I'm still being spied upon. And I'm starting to think I might prefer those prying, nosy communist eyes to a litany of technological advances which track my every move. This is Mark Sasse for the Crossing Ideas podcast. Coming up next in episode 5, Chi Lien, Tea, and Patience. Our world could use a lot more of each one. That's next on the Crossing Ideas podcast. I'd love to hear your comments. Please share with your friends. Click and subscribe for future episodes. Thanks for listening.